When series creator Akira Toriyama wrapped up the Dragon Ball manga in 1995, it did not mean that he went right into retirement, despite how burnt out many fans felt that he was from writing a weekly manga, and he very well could have, considering the wealth that Toriyama had built for himself since the early 80s. Toriyama would continue to work on other manga as well as his obligations to various video games like Dragon Quest and other little things here and there, but it seems to me, looking back now, that Toriyama always had a fondness for the world he created within the pages of Dragon Ball, and he himself would confirm this when he would finally come back 17 years later to help out with Battle of Gods and really immerse himself back into that world. You could tell Toriyama missed Dragon Ball despite being happy it was over because of how stressful it was. But Toriyama would give himself an opportunity to revisit this world on his terms in his way without writing a weekly manga. Something very similar happened in the 80s when he started to write Dragon Ball. If you remember, there was a crossover with Dr. Slump in Dragon Ball, and that was, to me, Toriyama being able to revisit the character of Arale and Dr. Slump and revisit that world without having to write a new issue or a new chapter of Dr. Slump. Well, something similar happened in the late 90s, early 2000s when Toriyama would return to the world of Dragon Ball, albeit not directly and not with a new chapter and not with a new story, but a story of a new character within the world of Dragon Ball with the same iconography and the same overall feel and tone and aesthetic of Dragon Ball, and soon would create a manga that would be a part, albeit very loosely, of the Dragon Ball world, featuring the newest student of Dragon Ball's main character, Son Goku, and his adventures. We're talking about Neko Majin, and on this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, I tell you the entire history of the Neko Majin and Neko Majin Z character, the manga, and what this actually is to those who may not know. When Toriyama started working on Neko Majin, you couldn't really tell that it was a part of the Dragon Ball world based on the early chapters. And we really don't know what was going through Toriyama's head at the time, but Neko Majin had one of the most unusual release schedules ever in manga, because the reality is it had no schedule. Toriyama just wrote whatever he wanted whenever he wanted, and sometimes you had to wait years before the next Neko Majin chapter would come out. Luckily, in April of 2005, they compiled all 8 chapters into one volume and released it. But unfortunately, many Dragon Ball fans outside of Japan never got a chance to even read or even look at Neko Majin because Viz has not released a translation of this manga, with the exception of just one chapter that was released in the American Shonen Jump compilation magazine, or book, or whatever you want to call it, in October of 2007, which is out of print. And because there was no set schedule, there was no weekly manga like Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump had been before, and as a result was not featured in Weekly Shonen Jump, which had publicized all the major weekly manga of the time. Instead, it was part of a different magazine, a different release from Shueisha entitled Monthly Shonen Jump, which no longer exists. But the very first chapter did appear in Weekly Shonen Jump in April of 1999. Now, as I stated, the first 2 chapters of Neko Majin were titled Neko Majin Gairu, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and they had virtually no tie-in to Dragon Ball at all. So it's easy to assume that early in the creative process, Toriyama had not intended for Neko Majin to actually be a spin-off of Dragon Ball, and it wasn't until Neko Majin Z that he really delved back into that world. And just by the name alone, Neko Majin Z should tell you everything, because obviously Dragon Ball Z, the letter Z, has a big significance in Toriyama's life, because even though the original Dragon Ball manga was not called Dragon Ball Z in Japan originally, it was Dragon Ball start to finish, but for the anime, Toriyama is the guy who came up with the name Dragon Ball Z, because he chose to give it the last letter of the alphabet because he was thinking the series was close to coming to an end, even though it definitely was not. But I digress. The first 2 chapters of Neko Majin are basically Neko Majin going up against bad guys, and they're filled with lots of Toriyama humor, which those of you who have been fans of Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump, you know what that humor is about. But even if you are a fan of those things, you'll probably still find enjoyment in the first 2 chapters. But it wasn't until the release of Neko Majin Z #1 on May 2nd, 2001 in Monthly Shonen Jump that we really got the total integration of Dragon Ball lore, and when Toriyama finally chose to delve back into the world of Dragon Ball. Now, prior to Neko Majin Z, the story of the Neko Majin was relatively simple. The Neko Majin are a race of magical cats that also know martial arts, sort of like the Samurai Pizza Cats, but with spell casting abilities. They have nothing at all to do with Majin Buu or Babidi or any of the Dragon Ball Majins. It's just that Toriyama chose to kind of use the demon race in a weird and wacky way for the Neko Majin. But Neko Majin Z began the actual incorporation of, well, Dragon Ball. Right from the start with Neko Majin Z Chapter 1, you can see there was a major overhaul done to the Neko Majin character. Now he's no longer just Neko Majin. Now he's pretty much a character that is meant to resemble Goku. He dresses like Goku, has the same kind of gi, now uses a Nyoibo, aka a power pole, and he has a new technique called the Neko Hameha. So you knew what he was going for right from the get. But what's interesting is that they established in the very first chapter that this might not be the same Neko Majin that was in the previous 2 chapters. The first 2, Neko Majin is here because he quickly tells us that his name is Z. So he's going by the name Z. That's his actual name. And we find out there are 28 Neko Majin discovered in the entire world, which is of course the planet Earth where Dragon Ball takes place. So with there being 28 of them, Toriyama could tell stories for all 28 if he ever wants to. So Z meets this cave boy who looks a lot like Dragon Boy. Now, if you've never seen my video on Dragon Boy, you gotta go check out that edition of In Depth because we talk about the manga Toriyama did before Dragon Ball and how a lot of Dragon Ball's ideas were incorporated into that story even before he made Dragon Ball. So that's a must watch if you haven't seen it yet, if you want to learn more about Toriyama's thought process and a cool story before Dragon Ball. But I digress. So Z and this caveman kid or this cave kid are arguing about who's going to go buy the cola, and they are visited by a spaceship. As many Dragon Ball stories begin, there has to be an invader from space, and this time it is indeed a new character, a Saiyan named Onyo, which is a pun on the word onion, and he's not alone. He also brings along his wife. Now, it's interesting because many years later, when Toriyama would write the story treatment for the 2008 OVA, Yo Son Goku and His Friends Return, Tarble also arrived with his wife. So not every space warrior is single. Some do get trim, if you know what I'm saying. Does anybody even use that word anymore? Anyways, he arrives on Earth and, well, it could be trouble because he wants to kill all the humans on Earth and turn the planet into a summer home. Now, you might be wondering, what about Frieza? What about the Empire, King Cold? Well, more on that later. But Z and the kid don't give a damn about fighting these guys right now. They see them as tourists and want to con them out of money because that's what people do to tourists when they travel. They get conned out of money. So the idea is they're going to have Neko Z dress up like a koala because koalas are rare and they want to trick them into taking a picture with the koala and then charging them money. So this is the exact same con that the kid from Terminator 1 tried to pull on Sarah Connor at the end of the movie. It's the same thing, and Toriyama, being a big fan of Terminator, probably remembered it and put it into the story.
Allá, viene una tormenta!
So in classic Toriyama fashion, the koala ends up fondling Onyo's wife, and that gets him really, really upset. Classic Toriyama. This is enough to anger Onyo enough that he transforms into a Super Saiyan. That's right, he has that ability. How and why? Who knows? It really doesn't matter. So Z gets back into his gi, and prepares to fight. And although it had been years since Dragon Ball wrapped up, Toriyama proved he still had talent to create funny and really exciting fight scenes, as he does in this chapter. So after seeing how powerful Onyo became when he transformed, Z had to follow up, and he did the same exact thing, revealing himself to be a Super Neko Majin. Much like Majin Buu, because there is a similarity there, Z and the Neko Majin characters are very, very, very childlike in nature. Like Goku, really, also. They have that kind of similar outlook on life. And they're also prodigies, so he can learn anything pretty quickly. After an epic battle, Neko Majin Z is the winner, and nobody, including Neko Majin himself, realized that he saved all life on Earth, and because of that, they were able to enjoy their cola in peace. So we thought that was the end of the Neko Majin story, but Toriyama would come back 2 years later on August 6, 2003, in that edition of Monthly Shonen Jump with Neko Majin Z Chapter 2, which shows more of Z's character as he's really becoming more like Goku. They introduce a new character named Thunderbolt, who is viewed by many as the strongest man in the world. Kind of like Mr. Satan. The only thing is there's no mention of Mr. Satan here, so either this takes place way after the end of Z, which is possible, or it's an Elseworld story. I know some people really obsess over canon, so it's tough to say where Neko Majin Z actually fits, but I would call this a spin-off, an Elseworld story, a what-if story, as opposed to actually thinking it's part of the main Dragon Ball, you know, I guess canon or manga canon or whatever you want to call it. Now, that being said, even though Z wants to battle this guy because he's like Goku and wants to test his own body and his own skills, he is not the villain of this story. Onyo returns, and he's not alone. He returns to Earth with Frieza's son, Kuriza. Now, I've already done a video about Frieza's son, Kuriza, in the past, but this is the actual first appearance of Kuriza before he would appear in various Dragon Ball video games in the future. And we find out that the reason why Onyo is so upset is because, well, the fact that he lost the fight in the last chapter led to him getting divorced, and he wants revenge, so he's brought Frieza's dangerous son to challenge Z. Kuriza and Z have a really fun fight where Kuriza is pushed to transform from his, base form or his first form into a form that resembles Frieza's final form, which is again Toriyama kind of poking fun at the Frieza saga himself and what he wrote so many years before. And what makes me laugh about this is that Toriyama knows that the Frieza fight with Goku was really long in the anime and the manga, so Onyo is pressuring Kuriza to finish it off because they have 3 pages left. So as the fight progresses, Kuriza keeps talking about we only have 2 pages left or 1 page left, and it's really funny because it's like Toriyama saying, don't worry, this is not going to be as long as the Frieza fight. And it's great. Like, it's great that he has that kind of self-referential meta humor. But unfortunately, Toriyama does run out of pages, and as a result of that, they choose to postpone the fight until tomorrow. Wacky. But Onyo and Kuriza would not be the last members of their race to appear in this story. How about some actual Dragon Ball characters? Well, Vegeta and Goku still to come. Now, surprisingly enough, Toriyama would not continue the story right away. In fact, the very next week he released another Neko Majin side story called Neko Majin Mike, which was only about 19 pages, very, very short sort of side story to the side story, because this is not really about Z. It's actually about the original Neko Majin, or one named Mike. I'm not really sure, to be honest, if it's supposed to be the same guy or not, but he finds out that he overslept and wakes up to a whole different world where his friend from childhood is all grown up, and this leads to a totally different story that's unrelated to the story of Z, so there isn't much to say on that one. But Toriyama would return to covering the story of Z with Neko Majin Z Chapter 3, but that wouldn't come out until February of 2004. So again, several months in between these chapters, or at times years, and this is where we see the actual incorporation of real Dragon Ball characters into the story. Now, in the previous section, I talked about when this story actually takes place, and I said it was an Elseworld story, and this pretty much confirms it, because this had to have taken place prior to even the Saiyan arc in the series, the Vegeta saga, because Vegeta is still working for Frieza. In fact, the plot of this is We have Onyo. It's been a day. He wants his revenge on Z, but Vegeta is on his way to Earth because he was ordered by Frieza to come rescue his son. So again, don't ever try to rack your head over trying to make it fit into the Dragon Ball world because it's not really supposed to. It's pure comedy. In fact, in the chapter, Onyo himself tells Vegeta, wait a minute, aren't you in the wrong manga? Like, why are you even here? And of course, Z and his boy are like, this guy's very proud, so he's probably got money, which is awesome. And they try the koala scheme again. Z and Vegeta start trading ki blasts, and then Vegeta transforms. How can Vegeta transform if he's still working for Frieza? Again, don't try to make sense of it. It's just wacky. But as we established before, Z can become a Super Neko Majin to even the odds. But before the fight can happen, Vegeta gets a call on his cell phone. Somehow cell phone reception works, even though it really doesn't. Vegeta tucks his tail between his legs and leaves the planet and states that he will never appear in a gag manga ever again. Good lord, do I love this. And it's very similar to the line he had in Dragon Ball Super episode 69, where he stated that he would never face off against a gag character again, which wound up being Arale. So I love the fact there's an Easter egg in that episode that references Neko Majin. Not to mention that in the very first episode of Dragon Ball Super, you can see Neko Majin on the table where Majin Buu is sitting. So there's all kinds of little Easter eggs involving this character. Now, business does pick up in Chapter 4 because in that chapter, Z ends up meeting Majin Buu, his, demonic counterpart, I guess you could say, and they bring him into the story. Of course, the cave kid thinks it is Z at first, but it's in fact not Neko Majin, it's a different Majin. But we do find out that Mr. Satan does indeed exist in this world, as does Satan City. So again, Toriyama picks and chooses what he wants to from different parts of the story. But we're now introduced to another Majin, not Z or Buu. We are introduced to Usa Majin, who's basically, according to Z, a Neko Majin knockoff. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is supposed to be a pun making fun of the United States by calling him USA or USA Majin. I don't really know if that's the joke here, but he intends to take Z's power, what they call the Majin Dama. This is the chapter that reveals that Z was indeed a student of Goku's, and Majin Usa threatens to crush an extremely rare Dragon Box edition of a Goku figure, which Z is not going to put up with. That's going to get under his skin. Awesome. So Z ends up giving up his Majin Dama, his Majin Ball of Energy, but before anything can happen, Majin Buu appears. He thinks that Usa is Neko Majin, and he knocks him away like a piece of trash. And then Z says that it's time to get payback, and he has to give up all the Majin Dama he took from the other 27 Neko Majin, and that's how the chapter ends. And finally, we come to Chapter 5 of Neko Majin, which was released on January 6, 2005. And finally, Goku appears in Neko Majin Z. Now, obviously this chapter, just by reading the first few pages, you can tell it takes place after the end of Z, after Goku already met Oob, because Goku is wearing his classic blue End of Gi outfit. And the chapter opens up with him trying to find Neko Majin Z. They try the koala scam again, and Goku recognizes him as somebody who he knew, who is his former student. And in classic Goku fashion, he wants to challenge himself against Z to see how strong he got. So we have this really fun battle in this chapter, which I think is one of the best battles Toriyama wrote in the entire Neko Majin saga. I mean, this is a lot of fun to read. They both transform, but Goku has a secret weapon, and that is a simple cat's toy, which is enough to distract Neko so that he is defeated by Goku. But Goku tells him that he needs his help because they have an enemy, a new threat that Goku, Oob, Pan, nobody has been able to defeat him. Only Neko Majin Z can do it. So of course, Z and the cave boy say, let's go handle this guy. So they go back to Goku's house, and it turns out that the enemy that they have not been able to beat is a simple, ordinary house mouse that they have been unable to catch. That is the end of the Neko Majin Z story. And what a tremendous punchline to close this out. So Neko Majin Z's legacy to me is a fun time Toriyama had in between the end of Dragon Ball and his eventual return to Dragon Ball years later during the Dragon Ball Renaissance. Either way, it's a shame that there's no localization of this manga because I had a great time reading it. And even if you're not a Dragon Ball fan, you will enjoy it, and if you are, you'll probably like it that much more. I thank you for watching this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, and I will see you in the future.